thewhispernook. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Now, as you can tell from the title, we are going to be reading some French fairy tales. These stories I have selected from a book called Old French Fairy Tales. This was written by Comtesse de Ségur and it was published in 1920. Now this looks like a very big book, comprised of what looks to be subsections and then individual chapters within these subsections. It appears to be set, kind of separated by what appears to be characters, and then these characters sort of run through about 10 chapters each, so there's plenty to read through. What I might read is the first few chapters of the first subsection called Blondine, Bon Biche and Beau Minon. So the first chapter is called Blondine and it goes like this. There once was a king called Benin. He was good and all the world loved him. He was just and the wicked feared him. His wife, the Queen Doucette, was also good and much beloved. This happy pair had a daughter called the Princess Blondine because of her superb fair hair, and she was as amiable and charming as her father the king and her mother the queen. Unfortunately, the poor queen died a short time after the birth of Blondine, and for a long time the king wept bitterly at his great loss. Blondine was too young to understand her mother's death. She did not weep, but continued to laugh, to play, and to sleep peacefully. The king loved her tenderly, and she loved him more than all the world. He gave his daughter the most beautiful jewels, the finest bonbons, and the most rare and delicious fruits. Blondine was very happy. One day it was announced to the king that all his subjects demanded that he should marry again in order to have a son who should reign after him. He refused at first, but finally yielded to the pressing desires of his people and said to his minister Leger, "My dear friend, my subjects wish me to marry again, but my heart is so sad because of the death of my cherished Queen Doucette that I cannot undertake the task of seeking another wife. Go, then, my good friend, and find me a princess who will make my sweet Blondine happy. Go, I ask for nothing more. When you have found a perfect woman, you will demand her hand in marriage and conduct her to my court." He set off immediately, visited many courts, and saw innumerable princesses, ugly, hump-backed, and wicked. At last he arrived at the kingdom of the monarch, Turbulent, who had a lovely daughter, bright, winning, and apparently good. Leger found her so charming that he asked her hand in marriage for his king Benin, without sufficiently inquiring into her real character. Turbulence was enchanted at the prospect of getting rid of his daughter, who was jealous, proud, and wicked. Also, her presence often interfered with his excursions for pleasure, with the chase and his various entertainments at the palace. Without a moment's hesitation, he acceded to the Prime Minister's request, and he returned with the princess to the kingdom of the good King Benin. The Princess Forbette was accompanied by 4,000 mules, loaded with the jewels and wardrobe of the charming bride. King Benin had been apprised of their approach by a courier, and went forward to receive the Princess Forbette. He found her beautiful, but he noted the absence of the mild and attractive expression of the poor lost Doucette. When Forbette's eyes fell upon Blondine, her glance was so cruel, so wicked, that the poor child, who was now 3 years old, was greatly terrified and began to weep bitterly. "What is the matter?" said the king. "Why does my sweet and sensible Blondine weep like a little bad girl. Papa, dear Papa, cried Blondine, throwing herself into the arms of the king. Do not give me into the hands of this princess. I am afraid of her. Her eyes are cruel. The king was much surprised. He turned so suddenly towards the Princess Forbette that she had no time to control herself, and he perceived the terrible glance with which she regarded the little Blondine. Benin immediately resolved that Blondine should be wholly separated from the new queen, and remain as before under the exclusive protection of the nurse who had taken care of her and who loved her tenderly. The queen thus saw Blondine rarely, and when she met her by chance, she could not wholly dissimulate the hatred she felt for her. About a year from that time, a daughter was born to the Queen Forbette. She was named Brunette because of her dark hair, which was black as the raven's wing. Brunette was pretty, but not so lovely as Blondine. Moreover, she was as wicked as her mother. She detested Blondine and played all sorts of cruel tricks upon her, bit her, pinched her, pulled her hair, broke her toys, and tore her beautiful dresses. The good little Blondine was never in a passion with her sister, but always tried to make excuses for her conduct. "Oh, Papa," she said to the king, "do not scold Brunette. She is so little. She does not know that she grieves me when she breaks my toys. It is only in play that she bites me, pulls my hair, and pinches me." The good king embraced his little daughter and was silent, but he knew that Brunette was cruel and wicked, that Blondine was too gentle and good to accuse her. He loved Blondine, therefore, more and more, from day to day, and his heart grew cold to Brunette. The ambitious Queen Forbette saw all this clearly and hated intensely the innocent and gentle Blondine. If she had not feared the rage of the king, she would have made Blondine the most wretched child in the world. Benin had commanded that Blondine should never be left alone with the queen. He was known to be just and good, but he punished disobedience severely, and the queen herself dared not defy his commands. That is the end of that chapter. Chapter 2 is called Blondine Lost. Blondine grew to be 7 years old, and Brunette 3. The king had given Blondine a charming little carriage drawn by ostriches, and a little coachman 10 years of age, who was the nephew of her nurse. The little page, who was called Gourmandinant, loved Blondine tenderly. He had been her playmate from her birth, and she had shown him 1,000 acts of kindness. But Gourmandinant had one terrible fault. He was a gourmand, was so fond of dainties and sweet things that for a paper of bonbons he would commit almost any wicked action. Blondine often said to him, "I love you dearly, but I do not love to see you so greedy. I entreat you to correct this villainous fault, which will make you despised by all the world." Gourmandinant kissed her hand and promised to reform, but alas, he continued to steal cakes from the kitchen and bonbons from the storeroom. Often, indeed, he was whipped for his disobedience and gluttony. The Queen Forbette heard on every hand the reproaches lavished upon the page, and she was cunning enough to think that she might make use of this weakness of Gourmandinant, and thus get rid of poor Blondine. The garden in which Blondine drove in her little carriage, drawn by ostriches and guided by her little coachman, was separated by a grating from an immense and magnificent forest, called the Forest of Lilacs, because during the whole year these lilacs were always covered with superb flowers. No one, however, entered these woods. It was well known that it was enchanted ground, and that if you once entered there, you could not hope to escape. Gourmandinant knew the terrible secret of this forest. He had been severely forbidden ever to drive the carriage of Blondine in that direction, lest by some chance Blondine might pass the grating and place her little feet on the enchanted ground. Many times the King Benin had sought to build a wall the entire length of the grating, or to secure it in some way so as to make an entrance there impossible. But the workmen had no sooner laid the foundation than some unknown and invisible power raised the stones, and they disappeared from sight. The Queen Forbette now sought diligently to gain the friendship of Gormandonot by giving him every day some delicious dainties. In this way she made him so complete a slave to his appetite that he could not live without the jellies, bonbons, and cakes which she gave him in such profusion. At last she sent for him to come to her, and said, "Gormandonot, it depends entirely upon yourself whether you shall have a large trunk full of bonbons and delicious dainties, or never again eat one during your life." "Never again eat one? Oh, madam, I should die of such punishment. Speak, madam, what must I do to escape this terrible fate?" "It is necessary," said the Queen, looking at him fixedly, "that you should drive the Princess Blondine near to the forest of lilacs." "I cannot do it, madam. The King has forbidden it." "Ah, you cannot do it. Well then, adieu. No more dainties for you. I shall command every one in the house to give you nothing." "Oh, madam," said Gormandonot, weeping bitterly, "do not be so cruel. Give me some order which it is in my power to execute. I can only repeat that I command you to lead the Princess Blondine near to the forest of lilacs, that you encourage her to descend from the carriage, to cross the grating, and enter the enchanted ground." "But, madam," replied Gormandonot, turning very pale, "if the princess enters this forest, she can never escape from it. You know the penalty of entering upon the enchanted ground. To send my dear princess there is to give her up to certain death." "For the third and last time," said the Queen, frowning fearfully, "I ask you, will you take the princess to the forest? Choose. Either an immense box of bonbons, which I will renew every month, or never again to taste the delicacies which you love." "But how shall I escape from the dreadful punishment which His Majesty will inflict upon me?" "Do not be disquieted on that account. As soon as you have induced Blondine to enter the forest of lilacs, return to me. I will send you off out of danger with your bonbons, and I charge myself with your future fortune. Oh, madam, have pity upon me. Do not compel me to lead my dear princess to destruction, she who has always been so good to me." "You still hesitate, miserable coward. Of what importance is the fate of Blondine to you? When you have obeyed my commands, I will see that you enter the service of Brunette, and I declare you solemnly that the bonbons shall never fail." Gormandonot hesitated and reflected a few minutes longer, and at last resolved to sacrifice his good little mistress to his gluttony. The remainder of that day he still hesitated, and he lay awake all night, weeping bitter tears as he endeavoured to discover some way to escape from the power of the wicked Queen. But the certainty of the Queen's bitter revenge if he refused to execute her cruel orders, and the hope of rescuing Blondine at some future day by seeking the aid of some powerful fairy, conquered his irresolution and decided him to obey the Queen. And in the morning, at 10 o'clock, Blondine ordered her little carriage and entered it for a drive, after having embraced the King, her father, and promised him to return in 2 hours. The garden was immense. Gormandonot, on starting, turned the ostriches away from the forest of lilacs. When, however, they were entirely out of sight of the palace, he changed his course and turned towards the grating, which separated them from the enchanted ground. He was sad and silent. His crime weighed upon his heart and conscience. "What is the matter?" distresses you, poor boy, and I promise to do in all my power to make you happy." Blondine's kind inquiries and attentions almost softened the hard heart of Gourmandinant, but the remembrance of the bonbons promised by the wicked queen for Bet soon chased away his good resolutions. Before he had time to reply, the ostriches reached the grating of the forest of lilacs. "Oh, the beautiful lilacs!" exclaimed Blondine. "How fragrant, how delicious! I must have a bouquet of those beautiful flowers for my good papa. Get down, Gourmandinant, and bring me some of those superb branches." "I cannot leave my seat, princess. The ostriches might run away with you during my absence." "Do not fear," replied Blondine. "I could guide them myself to the palace." "But the king would give me a terrible scolding for having abandoned you, princess. It is best that you go yourself and gather your flowers." "That is true. I should be very sorry to get you a scolding, my poor Gourmandinant." While saying these words, she sprang lightly from the carriage, crossed the bars of the grating, and commenced to gather the flowers. At this moment, Gourmandinant shuddered and was overwhelmed with remorse. He wished to repair his fault by calling Blondine, but although she was only 10 steps from him, although he saw her perfectly, she could not hear his voice, and in a short time she was lost to view in the enchanted forest. For a long time, Gourmandinant wept over his crime, cursed his gluttony, and despised the wicked queen for Bet. At last he recalled himself that the hour approached at which Blondine would be expected at the palace. He returned to the stables through the back entrance and ran at once to the queen, who was anxiously expecting him. On seeing him so deadly pale and his eyes inflamed from the tears of awful remorse, she knew that Blondine had perished. "Is it done?" said she. Gourmandinant bowed his head. He had not the strength to speak. "Come," said she, "behold your reward." She pointed to a large box full of delicious bonbons of every variety. She commanded a valet to raise the box and place it upon one of the mules which had brought her jewellery. "I confide this box to Gourmandinant in order that he may take it to my father," she said. "Go, boy, and return in a month for another." She placed in his hand at that same time a purse full of gold. Gourmandinant mounted the mule in perfect silence and set off in full gallop. The mule was obstinate and wilful, and soon grew restive under the weight of the box, and began to prance and kick. He did this so effectually that he threw Gourmandinant and his precious box of bonbons upon the ground. Gourmandinant, who had never ridden upon a horse or mule, fell heavily with his head upon the stones, and died instantly. Thus he did not receive from his crime the profit which he had hoped, for he had not even tasted of the bonbons which the queen had given him. No one regretted him, no one but the poor Blondine had ever loved him. That's the end of chapter 2. I will do one more chapter, and then I'm definitely going to continue on in further videos. I'll read more of these chapters. So the third chapter is called The Forest of Lilacs. When Blondine entered the forest, she commenced gathering the beautiful branches of lilacs. She rejoiced in their profusion and delighted in their fragrance. As she made her selection, it seemed to her that those which were more distant were still more beautiful, so she emptied her apron and her hat, which were both full, and filled them again and again. Blondine had thus been busily occupied for about an hour. She began to suffer from the heat and to feel great fatigue. She found the branches of lilacs heavy to carry, and thought it was time to return to the palace. She looked around and saw herself surrounded with lilacs. She called Gourmandinant, but no one replied. "I have wandered further than I intended," said Blondine. I will return at once, though I am very weary. Gormondonant will hear me and will surely come to meet me. Blondine walked on rapidly for some time, but she could not find the boundaries of the forest. Many times she called anxiously upon Gormondonant, but he did not respond, and at last she became terribly frightened. What will become of me, all alone in this vast forest? What will my poor papa think when I do not return? And Gormondonant, how will he dare go back to the palace without me? He will be scolded, perhaps beaten, and all this is my fault, because I would leave my carriage to gather lilacs. Unfortunate girl that I am! I shall die of hunger and thirst in this forest if the wolves do not eat me up this night. Weeping bitterly, Blondine fell on the ground at the foot of a large tree. She wept a long time. At last her great fatigue mastered her grief. She placed her little head upon her bundle of lilacs and slept peacefully. That is the end of chapter 3. That was a shorter one, but do not fret. There are multiple more chapters of this little storyline to go through, and I can't wait to record them for you. I hope you guys enjoyed these little chapters that we went through of this story that we're starting. I will be back very soon with another installation of these chapters. I can't wait to read through. So until